Definitely not Epsom. Yo, what's going on? It's someone that's no one, and welcome back to today's report. Today's report is coming from John White off of Earwood. When this happened, 2011. The drugs used were bath salts, spice, caffeine, nicotine, and alcohol. The dose, we'll just say repeated use. The route of administration, snorted the bath salts, and smoked and drank for the others. Gender, male. Weight, 180 pounds. Age, 19. Prior experience includes salvia, kratom, synthetic THC, caffeine, modafinil, and Ritalin. And the setting, mainly at his work, but also the store and to and from home. So here we are with a report on bath salts, a substance you can find at a head shop at one time. Often the ingredients of these products would be unknown and often are labeled not for human consumption. Most commonly, it would have been MDPV or methadone in these products, but it wasn't always clear. In result, some of the information in this report may be inaccurate. These two notes are left behind by Earwood to help clear things up. Earwood note number 1. This report contains a common misinterpretation of the DEA's November 24, 2010 notice of intent to emergency Schedule 5 synthetic cannabinoid receptor agonist. Earwood note number 2. While it may be that the substance described below is MDPV, bath salt products containing methadone have been reported in the U.S. This is marked as an MDPV report, but the identification isn't verified. But other than that, this report is a binge-like experience of this user's first time with bath salts. They didn't really hold back, as you can probably tell from the list of mixed substances, and they also dosed blindly and repeated throughout the night. But it's a really interesting story and a good look into what bath salts could do for people at this time. We'll break this down some more at the end, so let's waste no more time. Without further ado, let's dive right into this. After the recent 20 December 10 U.S. ban on the most prominent synthetic cannabinoids found in not for human consumption loose incense, spice, I wanted a new legal substance of choice. The new DEA-compliant spice products that have been available in my town have not been up to par with the old ones, including K2 Solid Sex. Salvia is fun, but terrifying even on a good trip, and is not a good choice for an everyday drug. The only kratom available nearby is the concentrated stuff, which has mixed reviews and is often claimed to be ineffective. Since about October 2010, there had been more products on the shelf next to the spice labeled as bath salts. But I was always wary of these because the head shop always had them on display next to incense burners, which were actually nothing more than glass freebase pipes held over a candle holder by brass wire. That alone held me off. Then when the news that the primary synthetic cannabinoids were going to be banned, I did a little research and I came to believe that these salts contained something called methadone, which supposedly had a lot of really bad side effects and was highly addictive. So until mid-January, I held off this new legal high before further research informed me that the active chemical in this stuff was actually MDPV. And from the reports I had read, it seemed a bit less intense than the methadone. So I bought myself a gram. I spent $30 on the higher quality stuff. There were some as low as $15 to $20, and I had about 2 hours before I had to start my shift as an overnight janitor. Since I didn't know how this stuff would affect me, I decided it would be best to drive someplace near my work where nobody would bother me, so I opted for a Walmart parking lot nearby. Note, I want to forewarn you, the listener, that I did something very stupid by trying out a new amphetamine-like substance with no means of accurate measurement, no experience with anything similar except mild stimulants, caffeine, modafinil, Ritalin, etc., or even an approximate idea of how much a dose should be. Even though everything turned out okay for me, it easily could have turned out much worse. Start. I had never snorted anything before, but I had heard of people measuring powder out by counting the bumps on a key. I also knew that higher doses of MDPV could also supposedly cause symptoms like that of MDMA and too much speed. And I had work soon, so I started out with a low dose of one fairly shallow bump. This stuff burned a little, but the pain was overwhelmed by the bitter and medicinal taste it had in my sinus cavity. After about 30 seconds to a minute, I started to feel a slight caffeine-like buzz. 15 minutes in. By now the effects had settled in pretty well. I felt alert, as happy, lightheaded in a good way, and clear-minded. However, the acid drips it left me with made me gag, though I held everything down. I felt fairly happy, though definitely not approaching euphoria. I remember being very interested in talk radio at this point, and I wished that I had some place to go. 30 minutes in. This is not a drug for sitting in the car listening to the radio. I felt perky, alert, focused, and in a good mood. And I decided that I wanted to go somewhere. I opted not to go into Walmart for fear of getting distracted and losing track of time, so I decided to go to a drugstore and get some drinks, as dry mouth was setting in. 45 minutes in. Once in the drugstore, I found that I was pretty focused on what I went there for. I had time to kill, and I usually find myself browsing through the shelves of every store that I go into, but this time I went in, I got a Dr. Pepper and an energy drink, went straight to the register, paid, and left. Only upon getting back to my car did I realize that I had spent less than 3 minutes in the store, and I still had almost 1.5 hours to kill. I felt restless, and I wished that I had thought to bring something to do. In order to calm myself a bit, I decided to roll a spliff of some of the new, less effective spice. About 1/5 of a gram is standard for my spliffs, and a broken Marlboro I found in the glove box. I rode in the parking lot, then went to an apartment complex next door to my work and lit up in the parking lot. 1 hour in. The spice, which takes about 15 minutes to fully set in, did very little, if anything, to bring down the stimulant effects of the MDPV. However, the spice did add minor peripheral visuals, an increase in creativity, and I got it all without the usual lethargy, cloudy head, and munchies. At this point, I realized that my heart rate was above normal for me, but still at a healthy resting rate. I got back in my car and chilled for roughly an hour, listening to AM radio. I found myself listening carefully to the words, intonation, and everything else you can possibly analyze what somebody is saying through the crackle of talk radio. I really wish I had somebody to talk to, and I kept trying to call into the station, but I was met by busy lines every time. I tried texting some friends, but found that my thumbs couldn't keep up with what I wanted to say. So I got frustrated and decided to just kick back and wait for work to start. 2 hours in. I was heading into work now, and I noticed that my heart rate was still elevated, and I still felt more alert and focused than baseline, but the happy feeling was gone. No depression, just no added happiness, and the lightheaded feeling was still mildly present, but felt somewhat hollow. When I greeted my coworker and the people whom I was relieving, I found that I was a bit more talkative with them, but not intensely so. 2 hours, 30 minutes in. After the previous shift left and the building was now empty, I showed my coworker the MDPV and I decided to do another bump. I loaded the tip of my key a bit taller than before and snorted it. My coworker, who I will call M, was more experienced with drugs than I and had done coke, speed, weed, psychedelics, and quite a number of other drugs that I either can't remember or can't pronounce. He suggested that I snort a small amount of water to wash out the drips, which I did and alleviated the gag-inducing drips. I started to feel the come-up much quicker than before. I rolled another spice spliff with about twice as much spice as before and waited for the MDPV to kick in more. 2 hours, 45 minutes in. I don't know if it's because I was standing and moving around, or if I had someone to talk to, or if the second dose just compounded with the first one more than I had intended, but I was quite a bit higher this time around. I was talking non-stop. I found myself reading every bit of text within sight, and I did not want to sit down. This time, I reached what I would call mild to moderate level of euphoria, and felt much more mentally and physically energized than before, but I did not get the jitters or the jaw clenching that most people report. I finished cleaning the room I was in, then pulled M outside to smoke the spliff. 3 hours in. I thought I couldn't stop talking before, but after the spliff, which I wound up smoking most of, and the MDPV had time to settle in a bit, I found myself continuing to speak non-stop. But now I was jumping from topic to topic fluidly, and I was cleaning quickly, meticulously, and steadily. I found myself using words I don't normally use, and I felt like I was being even more articulate than usual. My heart rate was back up, and using a pulse machine at work, mine was about 90 beats per minute. High, but still safe. 4 hours in. The euphoria was almost gone, but my alertness, focus, and motivation had declined very little. My heart rate had dropped a bit, back down to about 80, which is better, but still higher than normal. 5 hours in. The stimulant effects were then noticeably declining, but were still significantly above baseline. I decided that this was a good time to crack into my energy drink. I killed it pretty quickly, and after a few minutes, the energy drink kicked the stimulant effects right back up, but also threw in all of the negative stuff that the MDPV alone did not do. It made me shaky, break out in a cold sweat. I had a hollow feeling in my gut that I get from being overly wired with no actual food energy. I was still talking a lot, but I found myself tripping over words, stuttering, and misusing words. 6 hours in. The energy drink had mostly worn off by now, and the MDPV was trailing off. I still felt a noticeable, however, mild stimulant effect, and I was still completely awake. But the crash from the energy drink left me feeling kind of crappy and physically drained. I also noticed that I had no hunger, even though this is the time that I eat my lunch every night. I decided that I needed to eat anyways, and I had no problem eating, but no sense of fullness either. The food definitely helped to alleviate some of the negative come-down effects of the energy drink. 6 hours, 10 minutes in, and the caffeine crash was feeling a lot better. I decided to do one more bump to finish the night, which turned out to be a bad idea later on. One more in the nose, and the stimulant effects came right back up to where they were after the last bump. The euphoria was still present this time, but it was milder this time around. I held off the spice this time, but I did smoke a plain cigarette, which gave me a pretty good nicotine buzz. 8 hours in. The euphoria was gone again by now. The stimulant effects are still fairly strong, and I had finished all of my necessary work. I could have goofed off for the remaining 2 hours of my shift, but I instead decided to keep working. I wasn't even tempted to stop. I got into my flow and was working at a pace where my mind was just occupied enough to be content. 10 hours, 30 minutes in. I'm home from work, and I start to feel rather sexually aroused, a common side effect of MDPV that I read in several other reports. I started looking at porn, but I found I couldn't maintain an erection, and my arousal died off, and I lost interest. I was still feeling very alert, slightly focused, and my heartbeat was still slightly elevated. However, all of the other effects were almost baseline now. I decided to check my email before bed. 11 hours in. I cannot sleep. I need to sleep. I never have trouble sleeping at this time, but I can't sleep. Now that I'm in bed alone with my thoughts, my mind feels like it's in overdrive. I tried putting on a movie on my laptop, Fear and Loathing, but watching it just kept me up. I stopped watching the movie and tried just watching it, which normally knocks me right out. But all it did was frustrate me because every time somebody spoke, I would dwell on that one line and go on a long train of thought and then try to focus on the movie again only to realize it was now on a different scene. I tried music, different movies, turning off the laptop, but no luck. I couldn't sleep. 13 hours in. I'm still too alert. I can't sleep. I try eating something and drinking a beer, but all that seems to do is allow me to doze off for a few minutes at a time, intermittently, for a couple of hours, never actually getting any sort of meaningful rest. 17 hours in. I finally fall into a fitful, light, and meager sleep. I wake up 4 hours later, feeling physically unrested, although I feel like I'm mentally baseline. All in all, it was a pleasurable experience. I tried following a similar dosing timeline again on my day off, and found that holding off on that last dose let me sleep just fine the next morning. I have to be careful not to forget to eat on this stuff, and the raised heart rate should be taken into account when considering this substance. Since my normal resting heart rate is about 60, I'm not terribly concerned with it hanging around 90 for a few hours. I've heard reports of people having an addictive response to this stuff, but I found that as I get closer to baseline, I feel less and less desire to do more, and I don't feel any sort of pull or urgency to do more. After a couple of more nights of doing this, I found that the euphoric feelings faded quite a bit, but they seem to have leveled out at a mild level. Also note that most other people report grinding their teeth on MDPV. However, I have yet to experience this, even though some other substances have caused me to do so. This stuff is great for getting any sort of work done that requires concentration, and I plan on testing this stuff out as a study aid once classes start up again. I prefer this stuff to Ritalin and Adderall for concentration because while they can cause me to act like a zombie, MDPV tends to make me more sociable and expressive as well as more focused. It also mixes well with spice, and I imagine that it mixes fairly well with marijuana. I can't verify this since I can't smoke weed these days for fear of drug testing. It doesn't seem to amplify the effects of nicotine, but the two go well together. This stuff is not fun to mix with high-powdered energy drinks, but since this experience, I have tried it with a cup of coffee, and it's far more pleasant. I have read many reports of people doing very high doses of this stuff, and from my experiences with low to moderate doses, I would not recommend it, and I don't plan on trying it. My heart rate went up by a bit more than 30 beats per minute on these dose levels, and I can only imagine what it would do to someone with a higher resting heart rate than I taking a higher dose. I could easily see this being harmful and no fun at higher doses. For the same reason I don't recommend using this stuff daily, save it for when you want to be sociable or get some work done. So here we are talking about bath salts again. Well, not quite. This technically is the first report where we're just covering a bath salt without knowing exactly if it's methadone, MDPV, or something else. Now we have talked about MDPV once before, not methadone, but typically both are known to produce similar effects. But of course, each substance will have its own characteristics. But to start, bath salts emerged during the mid-2000s in head shops, gas stations, any place you can get shit like Spice, Kratom, tobacco shops and whatnot. Now at first I believe they were sold under the term of bath salts, which, if you don't know, there's a more well-known version of bath salts, actual bath salts, called Epsom salt, which Epsom salt is not the same as bath salts, nowhere near. So don't think that buying some Epsom will have some MDPV, methadone, or some stimulant in it. Now since head shops can't just straight up sell a stimulant like this, they could get by just labeling it as a salt you put in your bath, quote unquote, Now bath salt is just the term that sprung up due to this behavior. These stimulants have been labeled under other common products, such as plant food for example. Now to walk up in a random head shop or gas station today and find this going on is going to be much, much more rare. Most of the traffic for this market probably resides online or in cutting it with other drugs. I wouldn't be surprised if it found its way into X pills or meth even. When it comes to it, money's going to be money. And often compared in intensity, It will be compared to something like meth, or at the very least a strong amphetamine like Adderall. The high tends to be a lot more dirty though, compared to common stimulants, often promoting feelings of perspiration and possibly even creating a bodily stench. The experience is known to be physically taxing and can act the same way psychologically, especially when taken in binges. Psychosis could easily be a possibility. But overall, bath salts are typically known to be a dirty high, which explains why it was sold the way it was. And from this report, I think you can get an idea of how dirty it can be. Though, with all the other substances he combined also, this user most likely was at a high risk. But let's bring up a past report and see how it fares for some other users. The only report we have is Fun Until I Thought I Was Gonna Die by TJ. Now in this report, TJ and her boyfriend acquire some MDPV, quite a lot of it at being an eighth. Now in this experience at first, they use it sparingly, but eventually it turns to them using it around the clock. They're productive the first few days, but they continue to binge on it for up to a week. In result, they begin to hallucinate various things and begin to think that they're being out to get. They don't have food until 7 days in and decide to eat at a restaurant, which, being in no appropriate condition, the police show up and arrest them. So I think you can tell from that, bath salts can put one on a very dark road and fast. It is mainly sold to be recreational, and if you like it, you could easily end up wanting to do a lot of it without really considering the consequences. Considering how much John said he enjoyed it, I wouldn't be too surprised if he ended up in a similar state. But these two experiences are very good examples of how this being sold was just bad in general for stim heads. But we're going to end it there today. If you guys did enjoy this report on bath salts, want to see more on bath salts, want to see more on any substance at all, let me know in the comments below and we'll get on that. If you have a report, send it in, NoOneSubmitReport@gmail.com. Do me a favor, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, follow the socials, share the video. It's been someone that's no one, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.